Before moving on from the async await pattern, I want to touch on the use of the promise static methods within an async function. This can be a great way to deal with these static methods. So let's look at this slightly different approach. So this is what I want to use our example here. I have declared a URLs variable and it's an array. And inside of that array I have 3 strings. Basically they're URLs to the JSON placeholder site to retrieve to-dos, posts, comments. So the sample idea here is we need to retrieve all of this content in order to work with it. All right. So what I want to do is create a function. I'm just going to call it retrieve data. And it's going to be an async function because I want to be able to use the await keyword as a part of it. But I'm also going to use the promise.all static method. So here is our function, got our function structure set up. And I'm going to start off by declaring a variable let results equal. And here is where we want to use promise.all. So I'm going to use the await keyword on promise.all. Now remember, within promise.all, we need to pass in an array of promises. So right now, we've got this array of URL strings. That's all we have. How can we convert that to an array of promises? Well, when we're looking at the static methods, I showed a couple ways to do that. But here's another approach that works well with what I'm trying to do here. I'm going to take that array and I'm going to map over it. And remember, the map method of arrays returns an array. It allows us to iterate through every element in that array, and then it returns an array. So we're going to iterate through every element of this array, use fetch to fetch the data, and the end result will be an array of promises that when fulfilled will have the data we're looking for. All right. So let me go ahead and show you how we're going to do that. Remember, we pass into the map method, we pass a callback function. And I'm going to have parameter there, URL. And then what are we going to do with that? Well, we're going to fetch the data. All right. So that would go ahead and fetch the data, and that would return a promise, an array of promises for this promise.all method. That would work. However, remember, what is returned by fetch is a response object. So we still have to act on that response object. I want to do that so the promise is returned, the promise that is returned has the data that I'm looking for. So I want to handle that first. And so I'm going to attach a .then method here and pass in a callback function to that, which is going to receive a response object. And what is it going to do with it? Well, it's going to call the JSON method, just like that. All right. So I walked through that, and because I walked through that, that may make sense. But if you come across something like this, this could look a little overwhelming. What is going on here? And so that's one of the downsides of this, but I do like the fact that all the promises returned to promise.all already will have the data in them once they're fulfilled. And the await method will await until all of those are fulfilled because it's promise.all, and that will get placed in the results. And then I can go ahead and work with all of them at once. And so using an async function can make that a much better way to deal with it, because it's going to await until we get those results. And then all the code underneath here will await for that to happen. So I'm just going to do console.log right now of the results, and then we'll change this up just a bit in a minute. Okay, so let me go ahead and call this function here. I'm going to pass in the URLs array I have up here. We're going to pass that into the function I created. And then the results we get should have the data we're looking for. So let's go ahead and save that. I'm going to reduce this. It should come back by the time I get out here to the console. And so we should see an array of 3, and inside of that is each of the arrays that have the data in it. Okay, so it's an array of an array. And we can see that in here. All right, so that worked for us. Now, usually you're going to be dealing with this data separately. So let me just add one more thing to that. We've dealt with a little bit in the past destructuring. Destructuring, a fairly new feature in JavaScript, but it works great for this type of thing. It would allow me to immediately assign the data to different variables. Basically, remember, this is an array. It returns an array. So we can destructure that array. Well, how do we destructure an array? We use square brackets on this side. And then we're going to put in here the variables we want for this data to go into. So it will destructure that array. There'll be 3 things inside of that array, and remember they were arrays as well. But the 3 things inside of that array, the first one will be placed in the first variable, the second one in the second variable, the third in the third variable. So we can just do it like this. I'm going to go to-dos, comma, and then posts, comma, comments. So now these variables should already have that data in it and ready to work with. So we could have a bunch of different statements down here that's working with this data. I'm just going to log it out so we can show that we actually have it. Whoops. Posts. And finally, console.log comments. All right. So if we save that, and I get a reference there, to-dos is not defined. All right, pretty silly mistake here. Forgot my declaration keyword. So we'll use const for those. So basically, we're declaring these each as variables, but we're using destructuring to assign data to them. All right, so we're going to save this. Now we can see each of those separately. And so that's a quick way to grab those, each one of those, and then be able to work with them in the code that follows. And by making this an async function and using the await keyword, all of that comes back before any of this other code executes. So kind of a nice pattern when you're doing this when you're working with static methods that are available on promises. All right, let's go ahead and move on.